Hi, everyone. Welcome to Baobab Chats. If you haven't tuned in, I will be talking about GBV during this pandemic. I'll just allow for everyone to introduce themselves. We'll start with Tandiwe.
Hi everyone, my name is Tandiwe Chimbambo. I'm a 31-year-old woman based in Cape Town. I'm a regional administrator in the regional public, sorry man. I'm a, I'm a regional manager for MTN for mobile money, and I'm also the head of public relations in our family business called AKM. It's based in Port Elizabeth. And my views on gender-based violence, I think I'm someone who's very active in such a subject, and I've got so much interest, and I stand for women. And so I feel so honored to be part of this conversation today. Thank you so much.
Next, Amanda.
I'm Amanda. I'm based in Johannesburg. I work in financial services as a fraud investigator. As a woman, I think this is something that is very dear to me, this topic. So I think in any way I can, I'm very happy to engage in these conversations. So thanks for having me.
Lastly, Paul.
Hello, guys. Welcome again. If you were tuning into our previous broadcast, but if you're tuning in now, welcome. My name is Paul, and I am an African, and I'm an entrepreneur, and I am passionate about this topic today. I had to actually beg to be on this panel today because it's something that's really closer to home. Thank you.
Thank you guys for joining into this conversation. I guess I'll start with what is everyone's understanding of gender-based violence? What does it mean to you?
Okay, I'll go first. I think gender-based violence is a form of violence that is studied in many disciplines, including anthropology, it's there in science, we have it in theology. So it's something that is recognized in many disciplines and something that is relevant since the beginning of time. And my definition of gender-based violence is violence that is targeted to a certain group of people, that is based on their biological factors and their gender identities. So, although everyone is affected by this, mostly the men are the perpetrators of gender based violence. And according to South African statistics of 2019, between 25% and 45% of women in South Africa experience this, whereas compared to men, it's only 15%. So, when we are talking about gender based violence, we might seem feminist, but in actual fact, it's the truth. It's the truth that is more. It affects mostly the females than men.
Thank you for that. Anyone else?
Yes, before I also contextualize it in the way I understand it, I want to also share the same sentiment that it is violence that is actually targeted based on the person's sexual preference or biology. And she also rightly mentioned, we're sitting in a time when it is being perpetrated by men against women, and the numbers don't lie.
Mm. Amanda?
Yes, I think gender-based violence is violence that is directed to a specific gender, hence it is gender-based violence. But unfortunately, I think it's now synonymous with women-based violence, which just shows how disproportionate the violence is in terms of other genders. So I think it is violence that is targeted specifically based on someone's gender. But at the moment, I think with regards to us as women, we are statistically the targeted gender. So I think right now that is what the topic of discussion really is focusing on these days, because we are the most targeted.
I think it's important what all of you guys said, because that kind of brings me to my second question. Where do you find the middle ground between us saying that, gender-based violence exists within all genders? However, what we're trying to tackle now is how it's normalized, and how we can, how we should start with first the abuse that men inflict on women. Because I find it's very difficult to even start the conversation, because we'll have people that say, oh, not all men, oh, but what about this, what about that? How would you find a way to continue the conversation without people just completely blocking you out?
I don't think you will be able to do that because uh, well, you always risk offending another person when you stand your ground, and you always risk going against someone else's opinion when you voice yours. But that doesn't mean the conversations must not go on. The issue of gender-based violence is very critical in this time, especially in the context of the pandemic. We're already sitting on a pandemic that is gender-based violence, and then another one comes through in COVID-19, which exacerbated the situation because now sometimes people get to uh, 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 air out and blow out somewhere else. Now people are stuck in homes, people are stuck in closed places, and the perpetrators then there is no room to go out and vent out except just continue the same vicious cycle that we're trying to heal our communities from. So there is not going to be a middle ground that will be found. It's just like trying to say to murderers that we need to find a middle ground to make people live. The ground, the lines have been drawn a long time ago, and unfortunately, the people were drawing them, so to speak, were drawing in the sand. But now we're trying to make these lines on concrete blocks and say this has to stop. We're not going to look for middle ground. We're not going to look for understanding from our side as victims, from our side as victims, brothers and victims' fathers. We are drawing this line in concrete and say this conversation is going to be had, whether people like it or not.
And I think, sorry, I'll just interject and add to what you're saying. I totally agree with what you're saying, that important conversations, they're very uncomfortable. So you can't expect people to be very open to it all the time, but you yourself can't also hold back and say, well, people are not going to receive this well, so I shouldn't say anything. I think this topic, people are speaking out now more than ever. So yes, people will be uncomfortable. Yes, people will feel challenged, or specifically if you raise it with certain people who are the perpetrators, they will feel attacked. And that's fine. I think that's how it starts. You need to make people feel uncomfortable for them to want to shift. So they're going to shift their behavior, or they're going to shift in terms of how they view the topic, and hold themselves accountable to their actions.
I like that. Any thoughts, Tandira?
I agree with you, Amanda and Paul. Yeah, what I'm saying, I think when it comes to concerns about discussing about gender-based violence, we have to first categorize it to find out what is it about this gender-based violence that we actually want to talk about. Because I think there is general domestic abuse, and then there is sexual abuse, and then there is structural abuse, and then there is intimate abuse, and then there's abuse, just abuse of one person depriving one another of something that they want. So I think firstly having to categorize which type of abuse that is it that you want to discuss, and then you look in your environment, who is it that you can actually talk to about this? Because when you are talking about sexual violence, we are mostly concerned about little children that cannot speak for themselves, and then when they look around, who do they see? Who is there available for them to actually listen and hear what they have to say? And in most cases, these people will be abused by the breadwinners of the houses, so that they cannot go out and talk about this, for they risk their security and that sense of belonging in a particular house. And when we are talking about older women, who can actually go and report sexual abuse by themselves to the police. We have domestic violence, we have intimate violence, we have deprivation. So our partners are they involved in depriving us of certain things that we need in this, and then they are also participating in this abuse. So who is there for us to have these discussions? We've got families and we've got friends, but unfortunately I think we are living in a society whereby we are being judged, and then you, the victim, at the end of the day, you end up be they end up assuming that you were actually initiating it and you wanted it. So that type of abuse cannot be discussed with anyone. It has to be someone who is very close to you. So also in living in such spaces that we are far apart from, far away from people that we actually trust, the close members of the family that we actually trust. So I find that these conversations are actually difficult to have in person. So I actually thank you guys for giving us this platform to talk about this.
Thank you. So,
I want to come in to attend you.
all
Exactly
right,
what you're
Paul.
saying. We're living in a situation, and this COVID-19 situation is something nobody predicted, and there's not been things put in place and systems put in place to deal with the consequences of this, except the health side of things. We saw governments coming out splashing money just to try and ameliorate the plight of this COVID-19 and its side effects. Unfortunately, when you look at gender-based violence, it has been there, it is here now, and it's worsening, and nothing has been done to really put a drive to address it holistically. We just see adverts on TV, and I don't think it's enough. It's just like coming out and put adverts on how to cope on COVID-19 without putting medicine in the hospitals. There is nothing concrete that different governments, especially African governments, where this is reportedly higher than anywhere else on this planet. There is nothing that is concrete, and there's no blueprint we can actually hold in our hands to say, this is what our governments are doing. This is what civil society is doing. This is what churches have said they're going to do to address this issue of COVID 19 exacerbated gender based violence. You find that if you go into churches, they saw poverty as an issue that needed dealing with, and they introduced measures of working with your hands and talking about prosperity and all this and all that. But now the same is not coming in from our churches. The same is not coming in from our social and civil society to say this is the blueprint. This is what we are going to do. This is the step by step process we are trying to implement on dealing with gender based violence, especially in this critical time. And I think we can't just sit down and act as if something is being done. Nothing, if anything at all, is being done about this.
So, what I'm hearing, Paul, is that you're saying when the pandemic began, there were measures put forth in order to control how perhaps the virus was spreading. And like there were resources also shared. But when you compare that
Billions,
to, yeah, so when you compare that to gender-based violence, you see that people in power, authorities, don't really put in the same amount of effort with regards to
precisely.
doing something about
Paul,
with regards to doing something
Paul,
about the pandemic.
I
Is
actually
that sorry, Tandu? So is that what you're saying? Is that what you're saying,
Precisely,
Paul?
that's precisely exactly what I'm saying. Yes.
Okay. Sorry, Tandu. Yes, you were saying.
no, I wanted to comment on Paul's point when you were saying the governments are not doing enough. I actually think they are doing enough. They are doing what they can, because if you look at the constitutions of many countries, they recognize human rights, and this encompasses murder. This encompasses all sorts of violence, apart from gender-based violence. So I think it has got so much to do with the government, but also us as human beings. It goes down to us and our behavior. So I think gender-based violence is something that is caused by many factors such as poverty, such as drug abuse. So many factors, they contribute to our behavior, such that it has to begin from us, within us, in the environments and the homes that we live in, before we go out to the government and blame everyone else for not protecting us.
I hear what you're saying, Kadira. But if I could bring in this notion where if someone if someone doesn't have
Yeah, I think for me to add, while I think Tabby, it looks like it's frozen a bit, but I think I get what she's saying, but I don't think the government is doing enough. Because if you look at certain things like COVID is a good example of how the government can act, how they can, even not from a point of, yes, some things begin in the home, but from a point of making it a state of, this is now a disaster, this is an emergency. Because when you look at the numbers of how many women die every day, if you look at the numbers of how many women die every year, then surely it should be more of an issue than it's being made out to be. I don't think people are very they feel the urge to act, because it's one of those matters of, well, if it's not any of my business, then why should I interject? And I think the government, in a way, feels that because it doesn't affect the economy, because it doesn't affect certain things that the government would gain from, then it's not necessarily an issue that they should invest in terms of finances, that they should invest in terms of awareness. Because the moment they feel like something is taken away from them, they will act. So COVID is an example of, there were businesses shutting down, there were things happening that they needed to act, and they needed to take action and show that they were doing something about it to repress the situation. So I don't think enough is being done. Even if they are doing things, I think more can be done. But that's
And I
honestly
think
an
what you're
opinion
saying,
thing.
there's a statement that says that a problem shared is a problem half solved, and we cannot sit here with half solutions. The fact that awareness is being raised just means we're sharing the problem, like we're doing right now. We are doing our half part to discuss and put the problem out there. But there is more that
Yes.
needs to be done in terms of government policy itself. There's more that needs to be done in terms of setting up structures that are as visible as cell phone boosters we see all over when you go out. Because
Yes.
I watched a video from one of these guys, Somizi. Somizi, I think we all know Somizi, and you were saying that does this really have to come closer to the presidency for the people who are in charge to really push and put the same drive they were putting when we're dealing with these other issues? And while I'm at that, I just want
Yes.
to also highlight something very quickly. Gender-based violence is at the heart of violence itself. Violence has got many avenues, and gender-based violence is an arm that is just coming from the violent nature we're coming from. And there's a lot of psychological reasons why we're here. You look at resocialization. I was just listening to this conversation that just happened before. It was Vimbai and a team, they were discussing mental health. And you realize that in our African context, a lot of people suffer through mental health issues and they don't go to look for attention and help. Your spouse, your girlfriend, your fiance, or the girl next door, or whoever you see, is not qualified to deal with mental health issues. People need to learn to go and get help in places where
Yes.
proper professional help is offered. Not just assuming
Yes.
that because I had a good time with my girlfriend at the movie, so my mental health issues are sorted. You can be fine today. We have a classical example of Kanye West, who has been on both ends of the scale in terms of mental health. And we've seen and heard what has been happening with his life. But that's just the good side, because at least no one has been really killed, as in our African context. People are dying, and one person is one too many to really just sit down and still continue as if nothing is happening.
So Paul, if we want to stop or maybe reduce the high surge of GBV, how do you think that we should go about it without resources or access to mental health professionals, without being able to talk about it, without with it still being taboo? This question is open to everyone.
I just want to first comment on the government issue. Really, guys, do you think the government can influence our behavior? Because this violence, it's within us. The government is an external issue. The government controls things externally, but this violence is something that, if we look at it in our society that we live in, it's something that is acceptable in some cultures. Like if you look at it generally in first world countries, it is not as tolerated as it is in third world countries. In our cultures, in our Shona cultures, the way we grew up in, women were just stereotyped and discriminated against. So that type of abuse is emotional, but no one wants to talk about it. They only want to talk about it when someone slaps your face. But something that goes within you're abused by the people that you live in. You're abused because of you are stereotyped, you are sidelined because of factors or internal or external factors that you cannot change. So I honestly think that in as much as we want to blame the government, let us look into ourselves first and change ourselves within, and then start caring about the people that we live in, and then start
Tandiwe, I think there's a
Yes,
problem with that
sorry,
assertion. Yes.
sorry. This is what I'm asking, Chandiwe. I'm saying, if we put the government and people in power aside, what can we do as society, as people in family members that we know that might be abusive? What can we do without the resources or access to resources that other people might have?
Okay, can I go? So I'll start by just with regards to what Tendiwe said. I just do have a comment about that, or rather a question. It's a general question. You don't. It's not something you would have to answer. My thing is, if the government said there were repercussions, right? So if you put your hands on someone, whether it's your wife, whether it's your child, there will be repercussions. You will pay for that. If you rape a child, you will pay for that. If you slap a woman, you will pay for that. And that's by the law, that's by regulations, that's by accountability, right? So that's all the government would have to do. They don't have to physically go in homes and say speeches about don't put your hands on women. If the government puts in place laws to hold people accountable that put their hands on people, that rape people, do we not agree that that would make a significant difference? I think the issue is there are no repercussions, there are no consequences, right? So if I put my hands on you today, I do it again tomorrow. If you go to the police and they do nothing, do you think I'll stop putting my hands on you? No. So I think the government, it starts from them holding people accountable by saying, hey, this is the law. If you do A, B, C, D, you'll be held accountable. Being held accountable being life sentence, being 15 years in prison, being you are physically removed from that place where you are being a perpetrator. So I think the government can start with that. Then to answer what Tabi is saying, I think in families, accountability. Yes, as a family, you can't have law measures in place, etc. But if I see my cousin, someone who's my age mate, let me start with people who are like my cousins, my brothers. If I see them acting a certain way, speaking about women a certain way, I must not be silent. I must say, hey, what you are saying, it's not okay, okay? And then we need to get to where's that behavior coming from? Where's that thought process coming from? And then we need to address that, right? So I think in our culture, especially, I don't know, I speak for as Black people, mental health is it's a very gray area, right? Because if someone is violent or aggressive, then it's just a matter of, well, you're misbehaved, right? So no one actually digs in to say, what is the cause of this? Is it things that you learned that you need to unlearn? Is it a mental issue? Are you aggressive because something happened to you that you need to get help for? So I think it's that speaking about it, right? So when you see someone doing something, speak. I think that is the beginning, speaking, because there's too much dancing around the topic, right? So if we're at a function, if my uncle slaps my aunt, for example, people will say, hey, that is not our business. Maybe that's how they handle matters at their home. First problem. Second problem, it's not my business, right? So we wash our hands, we say, I don't want to get involved. So I think the first problem that needs to be addressed is silence. Break the silence, right? After you break the silence, find out what the problem is. Direct that to that person who's putting their hands on someone, that person who speaks violently or raises their voice at people, then say, hey, what is the issue? How can you get help for your issue? What happened in your life that is making you feel how you're feeling? What makes you think it's okay to do A, B, C? And then you address it from there. So that's what I think in terms of what Tabi said.
So, Amanda, what I'm hearing you say is that we should handle microaggressions in the public sphere amongst people right before it gets to the point where you actually have to go to the police.
With regards to where it starts with a conversation, right? So if something happens, let's not act like it didn't happen. That's what I'm saying. Don't act like you didn't just see that. Don't act like you didn't just see your friend pushing his girlfriend against the wall. Don't act like you didn't just hear someone calling a woman out of their name and or try to even put their hands on them. Don't act like it's not there. So I think speaking about it first will go a long way. Right now, there are not enough conversations happening. And I think that is part of our problem as society. And part of the other issue is how we, I think, are raised sometimes, because sometimes you hear things like, oh, that's what boys do, as a woman, you just take anything your man says. You're the wife, don't argue, don't, make a scene, just, no, that's what men do. He loves you, that's why he's hitting you. Another problem. So I think culturally, we are told to be silent about certain things because we don't have a place judging or getting involved in people's matters. And also the thing of boys will be boys, or women must do this, men must do this. I think that's another thing we can address as society.
And Tandiwe, what do you think about that?
I think when it comes to speaking up for other people, it also depends on the age factor, like I mentioned earlier on. It's easier for a child to open up to you and tell you that they have been abused, but grown ups like us, they try to hide behind the curtains and act as if everything is okay. And when you try to come and talk to them and try to help them out of their situation, it will seem like you're invading their privacy and then you're trying to poke your nose where it doesn't belong. So at the end of the day, you end up backing off. And then at the end of the day, those people, they end up blaming themselves. Those people who are being abused, they end up blaming themselves internally, such that they cannot even open up to you, thinking that you will end up judging them, not knowing that these things can happen to anyone. Like, for example, we've got international celebrities such as Rihanna in 2009 when she was being abused by Chris Brown. And we have here in South Africa, we have Kelly Kumalo, who was abused by Jub Jub. We have Letoya Mkene, the actress from Generations, and you've got Riva Steenkamp, who was killed in 2013 by their partner. So it's not about you, it's about the other person who cannot deal with their own emotions and their own understanding of the world, and then they end up putting it on you. So I want to urge all women to try and open up to anyone who's closer to them, just for the sake of being heard and letting your emotions on someone, because at the end of the day, these cases might and will end up in suicide or depression, and then it will come to drug abuse, and so many factors will be involved. So I think speaking about it is really helpful to someone that you feel you can, not to anyone.
Yes.
I think you raised an important point, Tandiwe, with regards to depression, suicide, being suicidal. There are instances where people think that maybe abuse is self-inflicted. So maybe, for example, if a woman says, I was being disrespectful, that's why he hit me. I should have known better than to be that kind of, to address him in that sort of way because of how old he is, maybe because of age, because of cultural norms. How do you go about letting someone know that, this is not okay behavior? This is time. This is time that you should get help. This is something that isn't okay. This is something that you shouldn't normalize, and it shouldn't be seen perhaps by your children or others around you. That's not something that should be okay. How do you begin that kind of conversation?
I think I okay, sorry. I think I agree with what Tindiro is saying in terms of there is an issue of victim blaming. And I think that's another thing that needs to be addressed. So usually what happens is the abused is the one who is ridiculed as opposed to the abuser. So you end up feeling like you're wrong for speaking. You end up feeling like you're wrong for voicing what has happened to you because people will ridicule you for it. So they'll say things like, well, he's your husband. You probably shouldn't have such a slick mouth, or oh, you probably shouldn't wear such skimpy clothes. So you get ridiculed, and I think that's another issue we as society have to address, the victim blaming issue. And I think there isn't enough support. I think it goes back to, is the government doing enough issue? I think there are a lot of private facilities that are available for counseling. There are private facilities. If you go, I think I've spoken to a few people who've had very bad experiences at, like, let's say, public hospitals or places where they thought they were supposed to feel safe, and then they were actually ridiculed. Like, you know, you go to a hospital and you say, I was assaulted, and they'll say, well, you have no business being out at 2 a.m. Or they'll even go as far as saying, well, girls like you, which is another issue in society, end up in situations like this because ABC. So I think it's another issue of victim blaming that society has to address, and an issue of more facilities need to be made available to people who actually want to get help, because some men, even women, you know, you have very deep rooted issues that you haven't gotten help for, not by your fault, but you just literally don't have access to it. Mental health is, in any case, for lack of a better word, it's very expensive to have um, even medication. It's like ridiculous. It shouldn't be a luxury for me to have sound mental health, but that is the case. So now imagine, I think with even statistics, it shows that the places where gender-based violence is the most intense, those are the places where people would probably not have access to these facilities that they need access to, whether it's the victim or the perpetrator. So I think within the discussion, I think what needs to be provided is for perpetrators rehabilitation. So there'll be consequences, but you need to also have things available to show you that this, what you're doing is wrong because ABC, and they also need to assess where that's coming from. If there's something that needs to be addressed and they're abused, it's a matter of getting the help you need in the way that you deserve, you know? So you should never feel like you're wrong for saying someone hurt you. You should never feel like someone thinks you're a liar because you said someone hurt you. So I think on both sides, we just need those environments where resources are available for the victims, and there is a course of action for the perpetrators.
All right. Thank you, Amanda. Paul, do you have any thoughts?
Yes, I've been just absorbing what I'm actually hearing from my other guys here, and I think it also comes and brings me to that point that we need to re-educate ourselves. We need to relearn certain concepts, and some of these concepts, as I've been listening, are things that people just got from culture and tradition. As crude as they may sound, there's a lot of these that came from culture and tradition and all these other places. And you also find out that having these conversations at an equal footing is going to be almost impossible. But also, a dialogue is really needed because we are not going to say we're going to have a battle of the sexes. When someone once said, when families shoot, no one wins. We have to come down and sit down and be human beings. There's something that you said that is very interesting. It's actually Amanda who mentioned it, when she said that this is more prevalent in poor communities. Almost all societal ills are more prevalent in poor communities. And the reason why sometimes you find that the government is reluctant on doing anything is it is not only bringing in one aspect to deal with this whole scourge that will solve the problem. A lot has to change. A lot has to change. A whole lot has to. It's like a real cultural shift and a real overhaul of the whole system. I do radio. I have a guy that I interviewed at one point, and he got 2 years sitting in a prison for being blamed for something he didn't do. But what I liked about him is he then admits in the past he was also living his life amiss. Both ends of the spectrum, there is something wrong with our community, and there's nothing that is concrete that is being put in place. Poor legislator. I mean, you can't tell me in 2020 someone goes to the police and report a case and nothing is done about it. It actually shows that the systems that are supposed to be in place are not properly in place. These issues are being
Sorry,
taken lightly, just like yes.
Paul, just to add into what you're saying, are you referring to secondary victimization? So that's like if you go to the police and you try to report a crime, or you say something like maybe you were raped, and then they start making you feel like they start victim blaming you. Is that what you're referring to?
Exactly, exactly. And in this day and age, it's something that is not supposed to happen. But now, while we are at that, there's also other things I need to bring into the picture because, like, someone said,
I think we just lost Paul. Tandiwe, what would you say
Oh,
with regards to victim blaming?
I wanted to first comment on Paul's point of the government not doing enough again. Sorry for bringing it up. I think it also differs from country to country. In South Africa, I think I was doing these researches on why the death penalty cannot be implemented on rapists, and then I found out that the majority of the cases that were being reported were actually false accusations. So imagine having to be hanged for something that you didn't do because a woman is pissed off with you. So I also think, in as much as we want to blame the government, we as people should be accountable for our own behaviors. And then, secondly, I want to interject on the point of cultural acceptance. In like Amanda and Paul highlighted, this is more prevalent in third world countries. So the factors like poverty would affect us, and then as much as we don't want to admit it, religion also plays a bigger role here. Because in Christianity, I think I don't want to point fingers, but they have got this in some churches, they have got this belief that if you're suffering for God. And then in the Old Testament, in Samuel 18, we actually read about King David's firstborn child who trapped his own sister and raped her in the house. But King David didn't do anything because that firstborn was supposed to be the next one on throne. And what did God do? He didn't do anything to King David for not doing anything about the situation that had happened in the compound. So I also think religion also, like churches have become this rehabilitation center of suffering. If you get raped, if you don't have to be angry at your victim, at your perpetrator, sorry, you don't have to be angry at him, you have to forgive. As a Christian, you just have to do this and move on. So I think the society that we are in, where men are put in this patriarchy position of controlling women, if we are deprived of certain things in our households or in the society, or if you are stereotyped, we don't see it as actually as a wrong thing to do. It's a normal thing to us because we grew up in it.
I feel what you're saying is very important. Um, looks like we're about to run out of time. Do you guys have any last words?
I think my last words are that this is a very complex topic. It's a very, I think it's a very long-standing issue. It's not anything new, and I think that's what's frustrating. That in as much as it's a very, it's something that's been happening for a long time, the numbers don't show that it's improving in terms of the number of women who are dying, in terms of how we as society are handling it, how the government is handling it. There's still that, I think, that disconnect of, so what is the solution? Yes, a lot is going wrong. Yes, there are a lot of things that are unanswered. I think the frustration is, so what are we going to do about it? So I think conversations are good because you're not sweeping it under the rug. I think a big issue is sweeping issues under the rug, and then you act like it's not there. So I think this is a start. Yes, people might say, well, you're just talking, you're not doing anything. Talking is doing something, because maybe in this conversation I've learned something maybe that I didn't know. You learned something you didn't know. So when you now see someone or you hear something, you're going to approach it differently. And you might say something to someone that will also make them think, huh, I might have to change how I act or think about ABC. So I think conversations are a start, but it's getting to that critical point of now, above and beyond, more has to be done, because that line in terms of deaths and assault cases and rape cases, it's not flatlining, it's on an incline. It's been on an incline for a while. So I think now it's a crisis. But what's sad is it's a crisis that everyone seems to not know what to do about. And I think that's what we really have to put all hands on deck and say, we need to resolve this. We can't continue this, because I'm going to have children, and then I don't want them to experience these things and these thoughts I have, or see these things that I see, without answers of, okay, then what's going to be done? If I report that someone raped me, will it be investigated? Will it be taken seriously? I think when I first really experienced how dark it is, I was in university, and there were a lot of things that happened to people, and they didn't even know they were assaulted. They just thought, well, this guy forced himself on me, and that's it. And then you have conversations later, and you're like, no, you were assaulted, you were raped. So I think it's those things of, let's speak about certain things. Let's make it not taboo to say certain things, because we need to make sure our children or children's children or our nieces and nephews are safe to at least speak to us. So I think that's what these conversations help. And we shouldn't get tired. If someone invites you to a podcast, go speak, say your piece. If someone asks you your opinion, say your piece. I think that is doing something. Don't think speaking is doing nothing.
Amanda,
That's how
uh,
it starts.
no, I want to come in and exactly share what you're saying right now, Amanda. And
Sorry, Paul, we're on
we
like a last thought.
cannot
So can you just summate what you're gonna
get
say?
tired of speaking out.
Okay, it looks like we're losing Paul again. Tandu and Mike, you have something to say?
I just want to
Tandu,
agree with Amanda to say, where in this society where there's a lot of open communication channels. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear
Yes.
me?
Yes.
we
Okay.
can hear you,
I can
yes.
hear you
Okay,
now.
I was saying
I
that in
didn't
this
speak
Oh
because
no.
people were listening.
Tandu, you can speak.
Okay, I was saying that in this society where we live in now, where there's a lot of open communication channels, it's not only individuals that can be there for us. We've got so many organizations that are there to support women and to support people who are being abused. So if you don't feel safe to talk to anyone, to closer to your circle, you can go to and approach these organizations. I think they will be really helpful. And secondly, as women, let's not judge each other. Let's be that open person who is willing to listen to when someone is trying to tell you something, because sometimes we end up judging each other, and then you lose self-confidence, and then you end up blaming yourselves for certain abuse that you may be facing at home. So I think we
Yes.
need to identify, like Tabi has indicated earlier on, to identify where you see abuse, and then as a bigger person, report that abuse. If you feel that those people cannot speak for themselves, you have got the numbers, we can contact the organization and then report so an incident is occurring. And then as a society as a whole, I think religious groups must start addressing these issues in their churches. I feel like the churches, the Pentecostal churches here, not to judge our traditional churches, but the Pentecostal churches here are more accepting. They listen to and then they identify abuse. Women have got much freedom than we used to have. So I think the expression of that freedom gives us confidence to speak up for ourselves and then to identify abuse when it's being done to us.
Sure.
All right, thank you, Tandua. Well put. That brings us to the end of this conversation. Thank you, Tandua and Amanda, for being part of this. We hope that this was very useful and informative to everyone who listened. Please don't stay silent. Speak when you can. It will make a difference. No matter how small, that is a difference nonetheless.
Great.
Thank you,
Thanks for having us.
Jesus. Guess who never wants to do that again?
Guys,
Taurus. Some. Yeah. Hey. Summer days, summer days, summer days. Take it down to the beach on a summer day. Timberlands on my feet, got the colorways. Got the girls in bikinis, about to catch a wave. Yeah, pull up to the city where you at, girl. Gotta order more Zans on a summer day. Summer shirts on the beach, it's a summer day. And it's safe for them girls on a summer day. East side, west side, life in the bay. From the north to the south, mayo everywhere. Slave queens, started thoughts, they be everywhere. See, yo, the girl that wanna party, they for everybody. Girl, you watching on the coast, summer sand, man. We got a party on the beach, it's a hurricane. Lifeguarding by the honeys, don't wanna be safe. Sipping honey, concentrate, I can concentrate. Pink umbrella, purple drinks, red cup squad. Blue sky, red rum, call me Captain Morgan. Short and cry, tears of vodka on the way to pain. I'm the king of the party, this is Project X. Summer days, summer days, summer days. Take it down to the beach on a summer day. Timberlands on my feet, got the colorways. Got the girls in bikinis, about to catch a wave. Yeah, pull up to the city where you at, girl. Gotta order more Zans on a summer day. Summer shirts on the beach, it's a summer day. And it's safe for them girls on a summer day. I make it rain on a Saturday. I'm J, but J, you know it ain't a day. Taurus be loyal for the family. I came a long way, I be galloping. It's way too late for me to go back. See, I can never ever go back. All I want is just a good time. DJ, turn it up for what? Uno, dos, tres, pop, like it, then you drop it, babe. Yeah. Feed me sushi, made me lose my man, oh, babe. Lemon and Corona got you talking crazy. I'm just waiting now to feel some type of way. Summer days, summer days, summer days. Take it down to the beach on a summer day. Timberlands on my feet, got the colorways. Got the girls in bikinis, about to catch a wave. Yeah, pull up to the city where you at, girl. Gotta order Mosaics on a summer day. Summer shirts on the beach, it's a summer day. In a safe for them girls on a summer day. Self in my wheel, look like gin and tonic, babe. Sip out on Marine Jocko, you drive me crazy. Something good to eat, I order matches, babe. Pizza on the debonair's a domino. Crispy on the duck campus delivery. Garments on the floor, and girl, you fornicate. Take it to the beat, you got a party, babe. Sipping activist, I need a catalyst. Got 100 in my pile.